Welcome. Bienvenidos. Salam alaikum. Shalom. Aloha. You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others. Our culture has become a weapon of extinction. Hundreds of species on the brink of disappearing forever, and among them, the human species. Here on the brink of World War III, we must gather together. We, the children of light, and offer a new way. Our goal, a culture of peace rooted in justice. As we gather together, let our revolutionary spirit rise up from the muck and mire of inhumanity and violence. Let us all be conscious of the love that unites us. Let us all concentrate on this culture of love and peace. I am Mirna Pagan from Vieques, Puerto Rico, a colony in the Caribbean which has for more than a century been struggling to survive. I commit myself, all of my energy, to the culture of peace. I offer the words of St. Francis of Assisi. Dear Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is sadness, joy. Join me in raising our voices so that love and compassion can manifest. Ábrete corazón, ábrete sentimiento, ábrete entendimiento, deja al lado la razón y deja brillar el sol encendido en tu interior. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Today, we honor the vision and inspiration of a great spiritual leader. As we walk on the path of light that he opened for us, let us remember the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Let us go forth as courageous, dedicated, fearless defenders of justice.
Time comes when silence is betrayal.
There comes a time when silence helps load the gun. A time when silence licks its fingers and snuffs out the candle of justice. A time where silence grows hate, sharp teeth, where silence can become our last word. We must open our hearts, our minds, our mouths.
Hey, we're in the middle of a revolution because I see the face of things to come. Yes, I do.
Which are broader and deeper than nationalism. We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, for those it calls enemy.
Every time a basic human right is denied in this country or from this country, we create a hell for ourselves, a dystopia where we are all the main characters, an apocalypse that even the zombies would not return for, a terrible television series. If a society is failing, but won't admit that it is failing, it still fails, I assure you. We must create a world worth loving in, a world worth forgiving for, a world worth screaming towards.
And I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today.
My own government wants to give out the silent treatment, wants us all to hush up and remember the good old days, which were really the worst old days. What we must remember is we are not alone in our pain. We must not be alone in our success.
I speak as a citizen of the world, for the world as it stands aghast at the path we have taken. The great initiative in this war is ours. The initiative to stop it must be ours.
For in this world, silence is a weapon, but so is your voice. Choose wisely. Choose with us. Imagine a world where we are all and us. A world where human nature inspires awe, not fear.
We as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society, when machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people. The giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered.
We must stop birthing new monsters. We cannot raise racism or classism or homophobia or transphobia or ableism or ageism or anything that must be fed hate to stay alive. We cannot afford with quiet cost, my people. The price is unforgivably steep. It costs us each other every time.
A nation that continues year after year To spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death.
Our spirit is what needs raising, must be nourished, must be taught to walk, to talk back.
These are revolutionary times. All over the globe, men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression. And out of the wombs of a frail world, new systems of justice and equality are being born. This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love.
We are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty, but love is somehow the key which unlocks the door that leads to ultimate reality. Toni Morrison said, "The purpose of freedom is to free someone else."
Now let us begin. Now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world. We chose as our motto to save the soul of America.
Greetings of peace, shalom, assalamu alaikum, namaste. I am Gwendolyn Zoharis Simmons, a member of the King and Breaking Silence Planning Committee and the National Council of Elders. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this national gathering focused on reimagining King's vision, the fierce urgency of now. Dr. King, in the last year of his life, spoke often and passionately about the link between militarism, racism, and economic injustices. He spoke about how our militarism in Vietnam was maiming and killing millions of Vietnamese, both civilians and soldiers. Also, 58,000 plus US soldiers lost their lives, and many others were physically and mentally maimed in that senseless carnage. Since the US's war on Vietnam, our government has engaged in several major wars. In the Middle East alone, there have been the Gulf War, the war in Afghanistan, the Iraq War, as well as our involvement in the civil wars in Somalia, Libya, Syria, and Yemen. Many, many lives lost and trillions spent uselessly in these debacles. The madness has not ended. With strong support from both political parties, the US Congress just passed the largest defense appropriations in history, $858 billion, which does not include the approximately $100 billion allocated for Ukraine in the war with Russia. While our tax dollars are burned uselessly, our situation at home is dire for many. There are 140 million poor and low wealth people in this nation. 10 million people in this country are without housing, are on the brink of homelessness. Medical debt is the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in our country. Prior to the pandemic, 87 million people in our country were uninsured or underinsured. An additional 12 million lost their employer-provided insurance during the pandemic. In spite of the desperate need of millions, the final federal spending bill enacted at year's end left out crucial funding for public education, school nutrition, universal pre-kindergarten education, affordable housing, and health care for all, as well as environmental protection. In this day and this time, we resonate with Dr. King's words, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on the military than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. These words are even truer today than they were 56 years ago. We call out to our government in 2023 to end these huge military expenditures that have nothing to do with protecting the homeland, but everything to do with maintaining a US empire and its continued military and economic hegemony in the world. This at the cost of thousands of lives abroad and poverty and violence here at home. We repeat Dr. King's call for a radical revolution in values to move from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. Dr. King called on our government to lead the way in this revolution of violence, saying that there is nothing except a tragic death wish that prevents our government from reordering its priorities so that the pursuit of peace will take precedence over the pursuit of war. On Dr. King's birthday today, January 15th, we reimagine King's vision. The urgency is even greater now as we are on the precipice of World War III and what could escalate to a nuclear confrontation between the world's two most nuclear armed states, Russia and the US. This would end life on earth as we know it. We say to our government, stop the war making, feed, house, clothe, and provide health care for our people here at home. Now it is my real honor and pleasure to open this up to our panelists who will speak to you from their own perspectives about this fierce urgency of now that we are confronted. We are pleased to have 5 peace and social justice organizers with us who will address the crisis of militarism, materialism, and racism today from Ukraine to Uvalde. Their bios are in the registration link you saw earlier. I will not repeat them here, but first we begin with Medea Benjamin, co-founder of CODEPINK, who is a tireless organizer for peace with justice around the world. Thank you, Medea.
Thank you so much, Zohara. And I love your beautiful opening, really laid the foundation for our discussion today. That Beyond Vietnam speech was such an iconic speech that speaks to us today, but we have to remember how much that cost Martin Luther King in becoming ostracized, in becoming persona non grata, into losing a lot of his more, quote, liberal supporters. Speaking out against war is a difficult thing to do. It was difficult to speak out against the war in Iraq when our soldiers were sent over there fighting and dying. It has been difficult to speak out against the wars in Libya, difficult to speak out against the US arming of the Saudis to bomb the people in Yemen. And it's difficult today to speak out against the war in Ukraine, but it's something we must do. Zohar, I'm so glad you brought in the cost of this war to not only the Ukrainians, but the people here at home. And we know how Martin Luther King said, I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energy in its poor as long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw our skills and money like some demonic destruction suction tube. And today we see that same demonic suction tube that is fattening the monstrous war machines, the corporations that Pope Francis has called the merchants of death. That $858 billion budget that you mentioned, Zohara, is mostly going to a handful of corporations that can only make their money when there is war, destruction, death, and suffering around the world. And this is money we could and should and must be investing, not only improving people's lives here at home, addressing the climate crisis, but we should be using it to help poor people overseas. Instead, we're investing in a war that is actually making not only the Ukrainians poor and suffer, but people around the globe, especially in the global south, where they are facing skyrocketing fuel and food price hikes, as are people in Europe. We're investing in a war that our generals tell us cannot be won on the battlefield. We're investing our money, our resources in a conflict that could well lead to a nuclear war. We heard Martin Luther King warn us about nuclear war and saying war was especially unacceptable in the nuclear age. He said our choice is either nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. But today we hear President Biden talk almost nonchalantly about nuclear Armageddon, as the war in Ukraine is in part a proxy war between the two nations, US and Russia, that possess over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. But the important thing that brings us here today is not to talk about how Dr. King educated his followers about the horrors of war, but how he told them that they had the moral obligation and the power to change the course of history. And that's our job right now, to take a stand for a ceasefire and negotiations, no matter how unpopular that position is. And believe me, it is quite unpopular. We have a moral obligation to convince our neighbors, our friends, our family, our work colleagues, many of whom have had their heads turned around by what is perhaps the most pervasive and effective war propaganda we have ever witnessed. While only a handful of people in Congress and only one in the Democratic Party, Congressman Ro Khanna, has called for negotiations, we do have over 1,500 faith leaders that have come together calling for a Christmas truce. And while the press calls for more and more weapons for Ukraine, just yesterday, we had a march in New York City with determined young people chanting money for the poor, not for war, money for the poor, not for war. And we have a coalition called Peace in Ukraine that is building peace rallies all over the country to mark the 1 year of the February 24th Russian invasion. We invite you to join us by going to peaceinukraine.org. We are building a movement, a groundswell from below, and let us take inspiration from the prophetic words and actions of Dr. Martin Luther King as we move forward to build a world without poverty, a world without racism, and a world without war. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Medea. Our next organizer extraordinaire is Ashley Woodard Henderson, who is co-founder, who is the co-director of the Highlander Center. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you, Sister Zahara. And thank you to all of the other panelists and program participants. I find it to be an amazing blessing that you all have not regarded it robbery to teach us today. And I feel honored and joyous to join you. And to the hundreds of people who are watching this Zoom call, both on Zoom and on social media, on YouTube, we love you. We see you in the chat. And it is, again, an honor to be amongst you. When we gather, impossible things become possible. I just have random thoughts, friends, and feel free to holler back at me in the chat. For those of you that know me, you know I'm a Southern supremacist and the daughter of a missionary Baptist preacher, and so I'm not used to people not talking back to me when I talk to them. So if you agree, say amen, and if you disagree, correct me. This is going to be as conversational as I can be in the 6 to 8 minutes that I have. Let's start at the top. I don't have to lecture you about the problems of militarism, capitalism, and white supremacy, in part because we've been screaming about the problems for generations now, and you all are living them every single day. The question to me, as we reimagine the legacy of Dr. King and his vision, as we do everything in our power to reclaim the radical Martin Luther King Jr. away from the whitewashed minimalization of his vision and his work, to me, the problem isn't my focus anymore, not in this moment. The question that I'm asking myself and that I'm asking all of you is, what might we do, each of us individually and collectively, to be a part of the solutions that will change the material conditions that we live in, right? That's the question today. And it's a moral question. No doubt about it. We should just do it because it's the right thing to do, to not treat each other poorly, not to prioritize profits over people, not to send warheads to places where people that look like us have no self-determination over their environments, especially in places that we colonized, that we extracted resources from, right? I could go on and on. Y'all know the problems though. So sure, we should just be good people to other good people. But if you can't do what Medea just said, what Tiffany and Liz and Luis will say, you can't listen to what Sister Zahara said and just change your behavior, so much so that you cause the whole tonality and activity of the country to shift because it's right. Let me ask you to do it because it's strategic. If you don't see it as a moral question, let me offer to you that it might be a strategic question, because what the United States will do to others, they will do to you. You don't believe me, that's fine. Let me give you just a couple of examples. You might remember the 20th century Black liberation movement, and you might remember dogs and water hoses, and you might fast forward to 2014 in Ferguson. Tiffany and I were both there, and you might remember literal gas bombs going off on US citizens. You might also remember that those same tear gas containers were also the same ones being used on Palestinian liberationists by the state of Israel, right? The very things that we will perpetuate and support with military budgets and other places, police and the state will use against the very people that are bending the moral arc of the universe towards justice right here at home. Don't believe me, just watch. Remember how folks said that January 6th was a shocker? Well, let me tell you how I know it wasn't shocking. It wasn't shocking because literally every second leading up to January 6th, there were people that were supporting the fascist tendencies of a Neanderthal. You all know this though, and I said I wouldn't preach about the problem. So let me tell you about the solutionary opportunity here as we reimagine the radical vision of Martin Luther King. Is that, we actually could love the people. We could love ourselves. We could love the people. We could care for the people, and not just individualistic self-care methodologies, but through actually showing up and showing out in support of one another. We've heard a little bit about the ridiculous amounts of money that are being spent to support white supremacy, capitalism, and the military-industrial complex. Why does it matter? It's because budgets are moral documents, comrades. You get what you invest in. And if we just invest in more war and militarism, we will not get peace. If we want peace, we have to invest in decriminalization. We have to invest in weakening the military industrial complex. We have to actually put that money into building healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities for all of us. That's not an impossible thing to ask for. It's not even asking for too much too quickly. What do we need now? We need, y'all, I mean, I told you I'm a missionary Baptist preacher's daughter, so I'm going to tell you how I feel it. Can I tell the truth, good friends? I think we need movements that feel like the best of Black church. And I think we need churches, synagogues, mosques, clubs, party spaces, social clubs, sororities like mine, all sorts of social spaces. Social justice, in fact, just means how we come together as humans to be righteous together. So if we can create social justice, what that means we need is spaces where we actually show up and treat each other right through the practices of righteousness. We, as those of us that identify as the left, those of us that identify as Democrats, those of us that just identify as people that want to do right, have consistently made overcorrections in our movements. We've conceded territories like faith, like spirit. We've conceded territories like the South, like rural communities, like peace and justice movements. We have created vacuums that fascists are filling, that military warlords are filling, that the right-wing extremists are filling, and we can't afford to concede those territories and create those vacuums anymore. This process might require us to tell the truth about how we got here, even in our self-critique, to demand justice even when it's from us, and to prioritize reconciliation even amongst us. Women have been calling for this. Black women in particular have been saving us from the brink of fascism for as long as there have been Black women. This is our opportunity to build a Black women-led, multi-racial, multi-tactical strategy for the sake of saving democracy. That, to me, is the solution. Fascism is a problem, is not a foregone conclusion. And I know there's a contradiction to this. I saw my friends from places like Texas and Florida and Tennessee and other places where fascism is happening on the state level. There's no question. And fascism absolutely is possible on the federal level. In fact, it's very, very, very close to being the reality. But we've seen places like Chile. We've seen places like Brazil. We've seen places where our people have come together across their differences that, quite frankly, they did not create, social constructs that they inherited, to say that together they were stronger and could do more than they could do individually. They made impossible things possible together. So whether fascism is a foregone conclusion or not, I know I can't get to beating it without you. I know that I won't believe in a Democratic Party with a backbone or accountability without you. And I know that out of all of the problems that we see, I hear the incredible voice of our comrade, National Council of Elders founder, Vincent Harding, who, if you didn't know, actually wrote the Beyond Vietnam speech. Vincent wrote a note to the Highlander Center, I believe the last time that he visited us at a homecoming celebration of our anniversary. And it was a big, long note and a big notepad. He told us that our work was good, that we should keep on going, that this world, this country, our state, this region, the South needed a Highlander Research and Education Center. But the point was the last sentence of Vincent's letter to us. He said, "A new America still needs to be born. Let us be the midwives." I am asking, I'm begging, I'm demanding of you that you accept this invitation that the National Council of Elders has created for us today, and that you join us, in being the midwives that will be the social safety net under our people. As the state continues to abandon us, as the state continues to harm our people, as the state continues to be militaristic, the only antidote to the disease of American fascism is you, our people, loving and showing up for each other. I'm committed. I'm asking you to join me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you. Our next speaker is Reverend Liz Theoharis, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. Welcome and thank you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Sahara. Thank you, Ash, and Medea and everybody. It's really an honor to be here with everybody today, honoring and carrying on this work. I should say also, in addition to being the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, I'm the director of the Cairo Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice, and committed to so many of the organizations that have pulled us into this powerful gathering today. And as we gather here to honor Dr. King, to think about this legacy, to reach into this fierce urgency of now, I think we actually maybe have to first catch up with him, so that we can carry on that work, but in our own context. His diagnosis, as well as his prescription to the problems, we can unite with today. And I think all of this points to this larger question that I think Ash just put forward in front of us is, how are we going to win? So Reverend Dr. King saw clearly, as we all know, as we've heard already, and we'll have to keep on saying, that a foreign policy defined by racism, poverty, and militarism hurt the poor and dispossessed across the planet, as at the same time it drained the U.S. of its moral vitality and of the resources needed to fight poverty and injustice at home. So when we kind of fast forward to today, in a country that's beset by searing poverty, by gaping inequality, by widespread environmental injustice, we see this overblown Pentagon budget, not just as a case of mismatched priorities. We see it as, and must name it as, a war on the poor. And so most of us that are gathered here already know many of the stats around kind of our military budget. Nearly half of the money that goes into that Pentagon, those coffers, go straight to for-profit war corporations. Corporations like Lockheed Martin, whose multi-million-dollar lobbying spending is only kind of matched by its excessive salaries of the top executives. We also know that the modern system of policing used to suppress Black and brown and poor communities in order to protect private property and preserve the existing hierarchy of power also is the same as this war economy, right? On a global level. So then if we were to consider this kind of biblical truth that where your treasure is, there shall your heart be, and we see that 53 cents of every federal discretionary dollar goes to the Pentagon and less than 15 cents on healthcare and education and childcare and programs of social uplift alone combined, then when we see that these trillions of dollars have been squandered in never-ending wars, many of them were named, but even those that are unnamed, and at the same time as if there's 140 million people who are poor and low income, we have to think about, how are we going to win? How are we going to change this? And this is maybe where I want to be a little challenging today. I want to say that poverty and the war economy are not only connected when we're defining the kind of triune problems of racism and materialism and militarism, but it's also where the weak point of these evils are, and therefore where we can strategically win. Now, when Dr. King talks about his stance against the Vietnam War, and when he talks about building a Poor People's Campaign in that last year of his life, those two are not parallel projects. Uniting and organizing the poor into a new and unsettling force to disrupt the complacency of U.S. life, because the U.S. is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, was Dr. King's solution to violence and war and oppression. So today, we often will kind of separate his positions. We have peace activists quoting his anti-war positions. We have civil rights groups holding out his positions on voting rights and racial discrimination. We have economic justice and labor folks talking about how he was concerned with poverty and low wages, right? And even when many of us quote these positions all at once, we then often go right back to our organizations, our silos, and our own solutions. But I think if we're to understand the invisibility of King's critique of all forms of injustice and inequality, and when we see that his opposition to the Vietnam War went hand in hand with a call for a Poor People's Campaign, his foreign policy and domestic policy positions united and centered around the power and potential of the US poor uniting with the poor of the world, we might have some of his strategic view of what was going to get us out of this mess. So therefore, in a moment and in a world that's on the brink of nuclear war, at a time when there's deepening poverty and rising costs of living, right after this Congress approved a budget that has so much more for the Pentagon and is threatening to cut education and healthcare, and we see Medicare and Social Security on those chopping blocks. I think looking at King's peace and justice positions, and especially his prescription to unmatched military spending through the unity and organization of the poor across race, gender, sexuality, geography, religion, age, issue, as a strategy to build power and win, I think is truly essential. You know, in that last moment of his life, a couple of weeks before he was killed, he said, power for poor people will really mean having the ability, the togetherness, the assertiveness, and the aggressiveness to make the power structure of this nation say yes when they may be desirous of saying no. And I don't know about you, but I think lots of us are pretty tired of hearing those no's. No, we can't expand this child tax credit. No, we can't protect voting rights. No, we can't save the earth. No, we can't cut police budgets. We can only cut education budgets. No, we can't study or fund war no more. But if we're going to turn that no into a yes, we have to build power. We have to build a broad and deep enough movement that compels those in power, that nonviolently forces those in power, that achieves victory even when against the will of those in power, to cancel debt, to enact fair taxation, to raise wages, to protect voting rights, and to turn this economy, this war economy, into a peace economy. So this call to action on King Day is that we have to build this movement from the bottom up, with the poor united and organized across all those lines that divide us, to reconstruct the nation from the bottom up, and to fully address racism, to fully address poverty, to fully address ecological devastation, to fully address militarism, and to get rid of, to absolutely abolish this false narrative of extremism and Christian nationalism, and to make those in power have to agree to our demands for peace and truth and love and freedom, so that we can lift from the bottom and everybody can rise. That's what we have to do. And that's what I think those of us in this Zoom and in so many across the country are doing. And so let us move forward together, not one step back.
Thank you so much. Let us move forward, not one step back. Next, to share her perspective with us in this portion of our program is Tiffany Loftin, who is with the Debt Collectives. Thank you, Tiffany.
No, thank you. I'm already inspired, and I know that folks in the chat are sharing that sentiment with me. It means so much. I think that, the last 3 years we've all experienced being on a Zoom call, and some of them haven't been as content worthy as the space that we have been in so far. And so thank you for, one, the invitation, and two, for your work to gather everyone here for us to not only talk about the legacy of Dr. King, but to figure out and present plans, which is what I've been hearing. It's like the best part of this call. What are the plans for us to be able to reach and get to liberation? I have worked with many people here before, both on the front lines, on the ground, and also in text messages, where I feel like a lot of this work takes place, us trying to figure out how do we get to a better place of liberation. And when I say better place of liberation, what I mean is, speaking to the power that the Reverend was just talking about, it resonated so much with me in this moment where I feel like people have sacrificed or lost their power during the pandemic. The basic needs that human beings needed were taken from them, and folks feel disempowered. And the people that I work with feel disempowered. Mainly the 9 million borrowers right now who got an email saying that their student debt was going to be canceled, and then getting another email reneging on the campaign promise that President Biden said he was going to deliver on. And we are now waiting for February 28th, where the oral arguments will present themselves at the Supreme Court. If you are in DC or in the area, please meet us there. That's my call to action for next month. February 28th at 10 a.m. we will be there to make sure that this nation does what it said it was going to do. Dr. King said the most critical problem in America is the economic problem. By the millions, people in other Americas find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. We can talk all day here and on social media about what we should be spending money on. And for the last 13 years of my organizing career, that's what we have been doing. We have been fighting for free education. We have been fighting for free and universal healthcare. We have been fighting to make sure that water, our basic need, is free and accessible to every single human on the planet. We have been fighting to abolish prisons, abolish ICE, abolish the police. And as a learning abolitionist, because I ain't all the way there yet, but I'm a learning abolitionist, we are also talking about universal and online voter registration. We are talking about the abolishment of the death penalty. Shout out to the campaigns and the work that y'all see all the posters behind me. These are all the campaigns I work on. I just got finished working on the Julius Jones campaign, who we were able to stop his execution, but he currently sits right now on death row still, even though he's not being considered for the death penalty anymore. And I want us to also abolish all of these congressional leaders, elected officials who feel like they are more equipped to make a decision about my body than I am between me and my doctor in the hospital. I want to abolish Congress being able to impose decisions on what happens on women's bodies, and our choice to love wherever people are. The last few years, as I think about power, because I have been wrestling with where are people at and how do we support them where they are to get what they need in their communities? I think about the attacks on voting rights, the attacks on women's bodies, union busting around the country. Shout out to union organizers right now who at Amazon and Starbucks and Delta airline flight attendants who are working their butts off. Can I say working their asses off right now to make sure that they can get a union, people who are protecting fair wages, not just higher wages and increases in the next 20 years, but need the money now. Shout out to tenants across the country who are organizing against landlords who are charging people $6,000 for a 536 square foot bedroom apartment. These people who are organizing to fight back against the disenfranchisement, fight back against the divestment that is happening in people and what every person needs here in the country. They're trying to destroy our democracy. They are trying to privatize our education. They are trying to imprison people, literally imprison people for their reproductive choices. They are trying to continue to invest in militarization. Joe Biden at the top of last year, after years and years and years of young Black organizers saying we have to divest in police, we have to divest in prisons, came forward as the president who won with the Black vote to say that he was going to put 100,000 more police officers on the street, because that was his idea of the solution to the Black Lives Matter call. And we have received pushback after pushback, divestment, privatization, after all the agenda items that we have already called for, the agenda that I just gave y'all, that I said, this is what we are fighting for: free public education, universal healthcare, ending ICE, and freeing Palestine, the list goes on. We have received pushback, divestment, financially. We've also seen a shift of the paradigm in conversation and narrative about what's important. Hell, Barack Obama himself came forward and said, do not call for defunding the police. So we are battling not just against flesh and blood and the budget and Congress and the votes and elected officials. We are also balancing the fight in a moral conversation around what human beings deserve and what we need. the capitalism, the fascism, the greed, to make it simple, that is happening right now by, you named one of them, Reverend Lockheed Martin, but General Dynamics, Raytheon, Bay Systems, Boeing, all these groups, all these companies, not groups, all these companies that profit the most when we are in war. $1.1 trillion to the Department of Defense. And I'm just trying to get my $22,000 of student debt canceled. $22,000 of student debt canceled. If you got student debt in the chat, I just need you to drop a money bag real quick, just so I know I'm not alone, because a couple of years ago, it was a shame to say you had student debt for a while. Thank you for dropping it. Okay, I just wanna make sure I wasn't the only one. I'm just trying to get $22,000 canceled in student loan debt. And we have $1.1 trillion in Department of Defense. And the fight that we have ahead of us requires every single person. I know I live in this world by myself where I believe that we can all get on one accord and we can agree on the same thing and fight and win the same battles. But I have learned in my experience that that is not the case. Not only do we have disagreements about who we are and where we should be, but we have disagreements on how we should get there. But Dr. King said, every man of human conviction must decide on the protest that best suits his convictions. But we all must protest. We all must protest. As a professor, in-house professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, I tell my alma mater, and I tell my students all day long, I don't care if it's just a post on social media or if you are actually joining me on February 28th in front of the Supreme Court, every person's protest matters. And I think that in this conversation around shifting the paradigm for the narrative of what we need as human beings and where money should be spent and where money does not need to be spent, we need to also consider what happened this past Thursday in Congress, where our government at the United States of America reached its debt limit. Last year, our debt limit was $31 trillion. We have surpassed the country's debt limit. Again, I'm just trying to get $22,000 forgiven. Like that, just cancel. $22,000. But we have surpassed our debt limit because we have an irresponsible, reckless government that spends money on war and guns and killing people and privatization and the 1% and privatizing education and trying to destroy and end the little bit of democracy that we have. Because if I was on a different panel, I would say we don't even have a full functioning democracy yet. We're still trying to get there. The charge that we have ahead of us is important for us to celebrate in Dr. King's legacy because, and if I can do, she's a friend of mine, so this is not copywritten or anything. A great friend of mine wrote this book, The Three Mothers. If you haven't had a chance, screenshot this so you can get it. Maybe you can add it to your reading list for 2023. Three Mothers. It's how the mothers of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and James Baldwin shaped a nation. And I just find it ironic that the women I'm sharing the space with didn't tell me in an email that we should have wore red collectively today, because I could have put a red t-shirt on. But I am honored to be doing this panel. I am honored to be doing this panel with a bunch of women, because as we honor Dr. King's legacy, the first thing I think about is how Dr. King even became Dr. King. He was just Martin Luther King for a very long time until he met his wife, Coretta Scott King, whose parents were in ministry and in faith and had their own church, and decided that if Coretta was going to date this brother, he needed a job. And so they hired him at their church. And then he got into ministry and became a doctor and a reverend. And we think about Dr. King's mother, who supported him on the trail to make sure that he had Jesus in him in the first place. We have to honor Dr. King by honoring the Black women who made Dr. King. And I think about the work ahead of us and this freedom liberation agenda that we have all laid forward. And I want us to honor the radical imagination that has been deposited in us by women of color who came before us, who literally died for that agenda. And it's not going to come. We're not going to get to that place for them. We're not going to finish the journey that they started just by voting, just by protesting, just by posting on social media, just by writing a letter or signing a postcard or a petition, not just by donating to organizations and campaigns. Those things, as one of my mentors, Cortland Cox, would say, those things are necessary but not sufficient. What is sufficient is the spiritual development and the frontline education that so many of us do in between our work. Because we have to convince people that this agenda is not only important and necessary for us to reach, but that it's possible. And a lot of our people right now are dealing with day-to-day struggles and do not believe that the world we are talking about is possible. So I am excited to share this space with you all as a 33-year-old Black girl. I'm calling from LA, by the way, from a 33 Black girl based in LA, who has been doing this work for the last 13 years, the holding the space to celebrate Dr. King's work, philosophy, education, and call to action. In a lot of ways, we are moving forward and we are still in the same place. And giving honor to the women and the women of color who have set the stage for us to be able to have this conversation and for us to have the great ideas of how we're going to get there. It is just a privilege to be able to share the space with you all. So thank y'all so much again, and happy birthday to the late Dr. King, who would have been 94 today or tomorrow.
Thank you so very much, Tiffany. And we have Luis Rodriguez of Tia Chucha Centro Cultural Center. And forgive me, Luis, if I have pronounced that incorrectly. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I'm going to start with a little small poem. It's called Perhaps. Perhaps when the stories are lost and pleasure is a dry river, and what makes the flesh sting is a long gone supplication, we may find our true names. Perhaps after we've created so many borders, so many walls, and conjured up even more laws to make even more lawless, we may realize it's ourselves who have been made illegal. It's our spirits we've alienized. Perhaps when the wars and the names of countless gods, which look and act like those who evoke them, finally end, we may realize that God is the unnameable, unobtrusive wind that caresses our cheek, the rain that falls on us all, the air that enters our lungs, and the nerves in our brains, so we can name whatever God we want. Perhaps when all the textbooks and written histories and science papers cease, we'll understand that nature and our own natures are the source of all knowledge, language, and histories, and we will always be able to rewrite them, reimagine them, and reweave them into the world. Perhaps when love has become the embers of what we hate, the residue of what we've destroyed, we'll know that love is the stream that flows through each and every one of us, the water we thirst for in the desert of our days, the ocean from which all our tears, full of salt and unmet desires, surge and flow. I want to start maybe personalizing, because all these big, beautiful, imaginative solutions, these are powerful words, powerful ideas. So I want to personalize it a little bit, only because I think it really becomes personal for all of us. And I want to start, unfortunately, with a tragedy. 2.5 months ago, my grandson, Joshua Taifa Jr., died of fentanyl. This is the world that we're in a world that's going to war, that puts more money in war and doesn't take care of our children. My grandson was 22 years old. His sister, unfortunately, is sitting in prison. She's 28 because of crystal meth. This is a family that tried really hard to keep our kids, our grandkids away from the inner city life that we grew up in, of all the drugs and gangs and wars and everything, and still they get taken, still they get caught. There is no immunity to this, except for what we're all talking about. And I want to mention this because, again, in his name and in the name of my grandkids, we got to fight for that world that we're all talking about. We got to change that world. We got to make it real for all of us. And it means a lot to me because when I was 16 years old, I was on heroin. I was homeless for 3 years. I was in a gang. I was in and out of jails. And I walked into a big giant anti-war protest. The August 29, 1970 Chicano moratorium against the Vietnam War. I walked in there, I didn't know what I was doing. People were thousands of people were marching against the war in East LA, the largest community of color that went against the war up to that point. And I just fell into it, but I didn't fall into it. Somehow it called me to something. It called me to be something else. I got arrested and I was put on murder's row after that. Hundreds were arrested. There was 3 people killed during the aftermath of the moratorium. And I got put on murder's row because they wanted to charge us for the murders of people that the police were killing. And I transformed in that little bit of time, the days and nights I was in that murder's row, because they had arrested hundreds and let them all go, but they kept 5 of us so-called Cholo gang members to get us for these things. And I learned a lot. I met fighters from the Watts Rebellion sitting there who were teaching us to fight and organize. I met people who were going against the prison industrial complex even then, even if they didn't have those words, who were telling us, go out there and be that imaginative, creative human being you were meant to be, not this closed off, drug addicted, gang infested young man that somebody else put you on. And that changed my life. I was 16 years old. And that's 50 some years ago. And I've still carried that fire in those moments. They couldn't charge me for the murders of those people, but the damage was done. I became a revolutionary. I became an activist. I became a leader. And that's what's important. I want to share Indigenous way of thinking because I am an Indigenous spiritual practitioner. I work with my Native brothers here and sisters here in this country, but my mother is Raramuri. She's from the tribe in Chihuahua, Mexico. And I have to mention this because people think Mexicans are immigrants or we're from someplace else. We are in our own land. We're not just, we're native to this land, many of us, a lot of us. And it's coming out now and because many people coming from Mexico and Central America don't even speak Spanish, let alone English. They're Zapotecos, they're Mixtecos, they're Pepi, they're Quiche, Guatemala, and there's so many beautiful indigenous people coming up. People now don't know what to do because they call us Hispanics and immigrants, but we're not. And I have a book that I wrote that came out just during the pandemic, so it never went anywhere, but it's called From Our Land to Our Land. And I want to share this with you because I wrote it so that people would know that when my mother had me born, she went from Ciudad Juarez, Mexico into El Paso, Texas, across the international bridge. But her roots are Raramuri. They've been there for tens of thousands of years. That border had only been there 106 years when I was born. She was going from our land to our land. And this is the way I want us to look at the world that we're in. We're not just people of nations or borders or this race or that nation. We are human beings. And every one of us belong on this earth. And somebody else has told us that we don't belong. Somebody else has put the walls and the barriers and the fences and says we don't belong here, we don't belong there. And we're living in the world that somebody else has made up. Somebody else has fabricated, colonizers and slavers and people who have just exploited us. They've been running this world. And now we're in the world we're caught up in that madness that they've created. And so I want us to begin to do what everybody else is doing here, expand our imaginations bigger than all of that. I'm okay with saying what tribe you are. I'm okay if you're proud being Black or brown or whatever it is, Asian or white, whatever that's okay. But don't forget, love the world more. I love the world more than I love this nation. Do I love this nation? Absolutely. I got no other nation. But don't close doors on me. Don't put fences around me. And don't tell me who my allies and my friends and my family is. Because as the Lakota people say, and we are all related. And those fences and those borders were only minimal, short time in our history. We're all related. We're all connected. Every one of us. And I think it's important for us to keep reminding us as we move forward in the big imagination, because as my good friend Michael Mead says, we are in creation times. What does he mean by that? Whenever those mythological stories will talk about creation, they always said it came out of chaos. Well, guess what? We're in chaos now. And they teach us that even now we can have creation times, because that's what those stories are. They weren't meant for about the past or something that happened a long time ago. They were meant to keep teaching us now. We're in those times where we have to be creative, imaginative, when we bring the feminine energy of imagination, creation into this world. That's what Indigenous elders have taught me. The feminine energy is primary. It's the constant. Masculine is important. You can't do without it, but it's variable. It's secondary. I have to say this because Indigenous people teach you this. The egg comes first, the design comes first, but we have to be in that reflective, imaginative space that allows us to be fully human again, to not be caught up in these little worlds that somebody else has created. I was in a gang where I was willing to kill somebody else in another neighborhood that looked just like me. Who made up that world? We were at war then because the whole world was at war. And these kids in these streets are learning war from the masters of war. The ones we're talking about, who have these crazy defense budgets. And they're learning it in the street. I have a grandson that I couldn't teach the real teachings, because even if you love your kids and you hold them and you teach them, you give them your values, they walk out the street, what are they learning? They're learning what other values, the colonialist values, the values of the exploiters, the values of the capitalists, the values of people who only care about things and not about people. And we got to change that, because I'm not in a home isolated. I'm in a world with all of you. We're in this together. Our mother's tribe has a beautiful greeting, the Reimagining. It's Guidava. It means we are one. They remind themselves we are one. And I want to share that. Guidava, all of us, we are one. Remind ourselves that when my grandson dies, all of us are hurt. And when your kids and your families and your communities are hurting and dying and in prison, it hurts me. Every one of us needs to feel this enough to say, then I will step up and I will do, as everybody else has said, fight with all you got. The way Martin Luther King said, fight with your imagination, with your dreams, remember? Fight with everything you got. But he didn't say fight with violence. He said fight with the power of the people and the strength of our imaginations and the strength of our unity.
Thank you
Fight
so much,
together.
Louis.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you for sharing so deeply from the heart. Dear friends, this is the end of our first section. These same wonderful speakers will be with us in the second session that will be moderated by Ariel Gold, the Executive Director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, founded in 1914 in response to the horrors of war in Europe. FOR has been consistent in its stance against war and war making. Welcome, Ariel.
Thank you so much, Zohara. It's wonderful to be on with you and all of our incredible speakers. And I want to thank all of our speakers. It's truly for me been inspirational. So I want to start off with a question. I've been, first of all, it's a very rich conversation going on in the chat, and I really appreciate that. And so I want to start off with a question to the panelists. There's conversation in the chat about nonviolence, and some of the conversation in the chat juxtaposes nonviolence with justice, and whether nonviolence is a useful tool in the place that we're at in this world of injustice, this world where we have debt from multinational corporations imposed on individuals, where the systems of inequality are so significant and severe, and where we have situations, right? Like we are watching right now in Ukraine, where there is a brutal war going on, and it began with an invasion, and we hear a lot about the right to self-defense for Ukrainians. So I want to just bring that question to the panelists. What is your take on nonviolence? And do you find it, how do you view nonviolence in respect to justice? And I'll call on somebody if you don't want to. I'm going to start with Dr. Liz. Reverend Dr. Liz, please, if you would start us off.
Well, I mean, I think to talk about nonviolence in such a violent world, I think we have to bring all of the contradictions. You know, when Dr. King talked about, you know, commenting about the outbreak, the rebellion in Watts that Luis just referred to, you know, he talked about how riots, rebellions are a cry of the people, and in fact never came out and, you know, would never come out and condemn that kind of rebellion, because again, it's coming out of a society that has been way more violent to the folks that were organizing and protesting on the streets than any of the crashing of windows that was happening. And so I think that when we talk about this question of violence, we have to look at a death-dealing system that we live in. You know, a cruel and unjust system, as Dr. King talked about. And we have to see that it is violence, like Coretta Scott King said, you know, right after her husband was killed. It's that ghetto housing is violence, that denying of people a culture is violence, that you know, not educating our children is violence, and an apathetic attitude to these, you know, grave injustices is violence. And so I think it's not that we want to juxtapose violence and justice, but talk about strategically how we're kind of going to win. And, you know, I have been trained in nonviolent civil disobedience and nonviolent direct action and nonviolent resistance, which is all about trying to bring about justice, all about trying to right the wrongs of society, but doing so by exposing the violence of the system, and then being able to put ourselves out there to, you know, to call people to account for that violence, and to say that it doesn't have to be this way. Now, the folks that I work with, many people have different views on, you know, what is nonviolence, what is violence. And, you know, I am mostly interested in, you know, how are we going to kind of build this kind of compelling power? And I've looked back at history and found, you know, case after case, example after example, when those who have been, you know, oppressed and hurt and violated by the system are able to build, you know, a movement from the bottom up that, and put forward a solution and a vision of what the world could be. Often we're able to achieve that through nonviolent means, but also very powerful means. And so I'm not counterposing justice or power with nonviolence.
Ariel, can I jump in?
Please,
Medea,
please, come in.
Medea, you go. I'll jump in after you.
Well, I was going to apply it to the war in Ukraine right now, because there is such a narrative that we are the Democrats that are fighting against the dictators around the world, that this is a struggle for democracy worldwide. First, let's say that that's total BS. While we are giving almost $4 billion a year to Israel to oppress the Palestinians, while we are giving, about $2 billion a year to Egypt, which has 60,000 political prisoners, and where we're selling weapons to help the Saudis continue their war against Yemen, and where Saudi Arabia itself is one of the most repressive dictatorships in the world. So, you know, let's not be sucked in by that. But there is this narrative that to win in Ukraine, we must be sending more and more and more weapons. And even people in our movement who have considered themselves nonviolent, pacifists, whatever, they have gotten so sucked into this that many of them are saying, yes, we have to support the Ukrainians in their resistance. And I want to go back here to Martin Luther King, where he said, when you're fighting in a nuclear age, it's a choice between nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation, because I think that is something that people really don't understand, how close we are to the brink of a nuclear war. And as we keep pouring and pouring more weapons into this conflict in Ukraine, we are moving us closer and closer to this mutual annihilation. And so I think we have to recognize that in this day and age, there is no violent solution, that war is not the answer, is never the answer, and that we have to oppose all of those in our government who continue to say we must send billions and billions of more weapons to Ukraine. It's time for us to say enough, no more weapons. We have to find a nonviolent way in this struggle, and I would say all struggles. Thank you.
Eric, let me just add one thing. I'm still in armed warfare, but my arms are not guns, they're not knives, they're not fists. They're poetry, they're words, they're speeches, they're organizing, they're all the things that we know we can do. We are still in a fight. I think Martin Luther King was clear about that, but he knew that that fight had to expand to include the beauty and the truth and the decency we can bring in this world. Let's expand our idea of armed struggle so that it's not just limited to the things that other people have said is how to fight. We can fight all kinds of ways. And I have been fighting ever since. I've never had to pick up a fist or a gun or a knife for 50 years. I don't have to. My words and what I say and how I say them is my weapons.
Beloveds, this conversation gets me tingly every time, in part because I think it's a fake ass fight. But secondly, to Liz's point, the good reverend, the people's pastor, but also because I'm the daughter of a Black Panther who has grown up my entire life believing that self-defense is not violence. And I also am a proud member of the movement for Black Lives, a movement of hundreds, thousands of people all over this country and internationally who have often been scapegoated as violent activists, Black identity extremists and the like, right? And so sometimes when I hear people asking, I'm not saying this was the tenets or the intention of the question, but often when I get questioned about whether or not I believe in nonviolence or violence, it's usually trying to scapegoat Black people for the existence of violence in this country, when to Medea and Luis and Reverend Liz's points, actually the causation of violence in this country is Christian nationalism and white supremacy, racialized capitalism, none of which originated with Black people, right? So what I hear in my head often when that question gets asked, and what I usually direct people to is, yeah, every training on nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience and just nonviolence as a lifestyle trainings, as many of them as I possibly can give you. And I encourage that. Whether I believe in it as a lifestyle or a tactic is irrelevant. I think it's strategic. It has been strategic. If you can't do it because it's right, do it because it's strategic. You're going to keep hearing me say that. I think the second thing that I would say is, Cabral said, tell no lies and claim no easy victories. We also have to be critical that as we've done nonviolent civil disobedience, the state and the white right has learned from it, right? And so we need to also be intentional as we're building strategy about what that means towards power building and then being able to sustain those wins. I point you also in the direction of the truth telling about how nonviolent civil disobedience was able to happen in the 60s and 70s. Because if you truly believe, comrades, that nonviolence existed without self-defense, you are naive, and that is revisionist history. I would point you towards the incredible video, you can find it on YouTube, of Angela Davis. She was incarcerated at the time, and some European journalists asked her about violence. Her response was brilliant and beautiful. I would point you in the direction of another great student nonviolent coordinating committee veteran, Charlie Cobb, who's one of my favorites, and his incredible book, That Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed. I'd point you in the direction of Akinyele Umoja's book, We Will Shoot Back. And I don't do that just to say, go pick up arms, because I can't get half of y'all to go talk to your neighbor or your racist kin. Why would I think it's strategic to tell you to take up armed struggle against the United States? Well, you just heard them talk about them having like a $1.1 trillion military defense budget, which isn't actually about defense, it's about colonization, but that's another question for another time. So what I believe is in strategy. What I believe is in nonviolence as a tactic. What I believe is that when my elders and ancestors said by any means necessary, they meant by all the means. But we are not in a strategic position, nor I think a moral one, to the points of my colleagues and comrades, to be thinking about what it means to take up arms against the US state. It's a foolish ideology. I think where we are in this moment, to Luis's point, is an opportunity where we can make revolutionary struggle, the love of our people, contagious for all of us. Right? I'm saying this as a person who has survived a white supremacist attack, right? You all know the story. In March of 2019, white supremacists burned my office down, right? And the office of my colleagues at Highlander. It does me no service to take up arms against those people, which is actually, to me, again, a question of strategy. It doesn't serve me to have them locked up. It doesn't change their heart or their mind or the strategies that they will use to try to defend their people. What we need to be doing is building a movement that's powerful enough beyond the weapons to be able to sustain the kind of social safety net that our folks have always needed and deserved. Our people deserve our excellency, not just our rage. And I think that's going to be really important. The last point I'll make is that often when this question gets asked, they're talking about violence towards property. And we saw that a lot. I know Tiffany could probably talk about it till the cows come home. We saw it a lot in 2020 of people and 2014 being like, they burned that police station down. They're so violent, right? Or, oh my God, they burned the flag. Lock them up. They're so violent.
Or the CVS, Ash. Go ahead.
Right, or the CVS, or the CVS. And don't get me wrong. I get it. We like our things in this capitalist society. But if we would prioritize the care of our people as much as we cared about the protection of property and buildings and corporations, we might not need to have a boring ass conversation about violence in the first place. And I think that is the point.
Ari, I don't think we have time for everybody to answer every single question, but can I add my 2 cents as well? And it'll be quick.
Please, go ahead.
What I needed to say. Ashley, you said what I need to say. I've been wrestling with this, not because of this panel, but because that question comes up so many times in every space I'm in all the time. And I was a graduate of James Lawson's school for nonviolent struggle. And we studied nonviolent struggle and how they used it in the 60s and 70s to end segregation. But I also think about January 1st being the day that Haiti declared their independence, and they would have not been independent had it not been for quote unquote violence. I think about Keenan Anderson, who was killed by police at LAPD here in Los Angeles on January 3rd by multiple tasers. He was a 31-year-old high school teacher who was in a traffic collision. And when the police came, as they usually do during a traffic collision, to ask what happened and to take notes and write a police report, they viewed him as violent because of the color of his skin and tased him and killed him on the floor on body camera. And the video has gone viral on social media. I think about violence, and then I think about slave revolts, or I think about Fannie Lou Hamer sitting at her door with her rifle to protect her home because people kept coming to harass and beat and fight her and her family. And I want to bring it back to circle one, that I do not believe that it's an either or question. I 100% agree that it is a strategic question. When do we use violence, and what is violence? But I also want to point out, because nobody said this, that there are a lot of leaders and organizers who preach violence. And those categories fall under two things: people who preach violence, whether it's subconsciously, emotionally, to create bias against other people, to continue fascism, or whether it is about self, and they trick people into stepping into tactics of violence that then sacrifice and kill our comrades and our family. And I've seen that multiple times, and that is wrong. So I wanted to make sure that was said, because we got almost 300 people here, and there are people who have been a part of the protests during the pandemic. There have been people who have said, don't wear the mask on the airplane. There have been people, right, who have coughed on people in the grocery store. There have been people who, and some of these people get punched, right? And the police will come and they will see my skin as a weapon. And we talk about violence in that way. And I don't think it is a black or white issue. Ironic. I don't think it is a black or white issue. I think that we need to have a conversation about strategy when it comes to how do we get what we want and how do we win? That includes nonviolent action and violent action.
Thank you so much. So we're getting a little bit close to time, so I'm going to wrap the next couple questions together. And I see there's conversation about in the chat about why don't we see a massive sustained movement in the streets? What is holding us back from accomplishing the marches that we had during Vietnam? And I also see a question in the chat really specifically saying, how do we approach family members? But let's broaden that. Like, we live in a society, both in the US and worldwide, centered on materialism and consumerism, and many people who don't even follow what's going on in the world, many people who don't even are barely paying attention to the amount of money that the amount of military aid that's going to Ukraine, the weapons to Ukraine, or the military aid to Israel. So how do we wake our society up? What are the tools to talk to not just family and friends, but larger society and community? And so how do we build the movement that we need to reclaim our society and to build a beloved community rather than the war machine that we currently live under?
And I don't think there are any easy answers to either one of these two questions. I think folks have been thirsty for a silver bullet or a platinum Band-Aid. And I hate to tell you, the truth is that again, I think we need a multi-tactical strategy. But I mean, I think I have more questions back to these questions. The first question I would ask in regards to why aren't people still in the streets is, who's the we here? Because Black folks have been like, we had 27 million people in the streets. It's the largest uprising in US history. I don't know what else you want from us. And then, right, that if we own, I mean, one, it's funny to hear the question in part because when we were just marching, people said, well, gosh, these young Black people, they only march. They don't vote. They don't go and lobby and advocate. They don't organize and base build. They don't train and do education and political education. So I'm like, then we go and we do those things and people are like, why aren't y'all marching? So I'm sure, again, that's not the intent of the question, but it's just funny in the context of the political climate that we're in. Medea Benjamin gets arrested more than any white woman I know. At least Liz Theoharis might be right after her. Brother Louise just told you about all the work that he's been doing, not only to save our lives, my life, but his own family, right? The sacrifices he's made to be available in an international movement leadership kind of way for the sake of all of us, while also taking care of his own kin, right? Everybody's doing the best they can, y'all. And the last 3 years have been miserable for many of us. We have literally saved democracy with our flesh, right? But to the point of the question, we've all got to figure out what our role is, what our gift is that we can contribute to this social safety net, and we have to play it excellently in a sustainable way, right? Because if we don't, then if we, like, the 20th century was the years of the single tactic win, right? Where, oh, you're a revolutionary if you organize, or like, nope, that's liberal. You're a revolutionary if you do the direct actions and you get arrested all the time, or, oh, nope, that's not revolutionary. The revolutionary thing to do is to like vote and be voted for. We need all of that. We need all of that. It doesn't mean you have to do all of that, but it does mean that you've got to figure out which of those tactics you might be able to supply and get down as long as you can get down, right? So why aren't people in the streets? In my experience, people have still been in the streets. And I think what we need to be doing is keeping our visual wide enough, our our parameter wide enough to actually see it and amplify it. Because if we can't identify ourselves, then the right doesn't have any work to do to try to erase us, right? We're doing it to our damn selves. The second question around talking to people, I always find interesting as well, because, you know, honestly, you all go and talk to your DoorDash delivery food service people, you go to Taco Bell and you talk to the folks there, you go eat at Houston's or whatever your jam is, and you talk to strangers about things. You ask them for things every day, right? There's an opportunity to continue to do that with people that you love and people that are your neighbors. It's just a matter of opening your mouth. I think the primary tactical question for me in this moment is, have we built a left that is too good at talking and not good enough at listening, right? I sit in the airport, me and Tiffany travel, Medea, Liz, Louise, we travel all the time. And I have found myself being less interested in being right in a debate with a stranger in an airport. I'm much more interested about what is keeping them up at night. And I found that if I ask a question and shut up and listen to hear them, to understand them, because I actually care and want to hear what they've got to say, I might have more of an opportunity for success to shift them to my political ideology than if I just come in hot like, yo, have you now or ever been in law enforcement? Because I believe in defund the police. Or have you heard the gospel of socialism or whatever it is, right? What we've got to do, I think, as an organized left, if there is one, the many lefts, is to actually listen to regular people for a change. Listen to them because we actually want to hear what they have to say, because if we listen, we might learn some things about how to bring more people into the fold.
Let me just add it's hard to add something to all that. It's so beautiful said, but let me just add something. I ran for governor with no money in the state of California because I don't want the money. There's a political industrial complex along with the military industrial complex, the prison industrial complex. There's so many, and it takes so much money to run for office, but we need to be there to raise these issues of poverty, to raise these issues of the military, to raise these issues of the climate, to raise all these issues. We need to be there. In spite of not having no money and running up and down the state, I got 125,000 votes. Can we build from that? I'm not saying me, I'll do what I can. Can we build from that? Can all the progressives and lefts and organizers and all the people out there, can you build from that? Don't have to come to me. Don't have to be about me. 125,000 people voted for me when I talked about these issues. Can we build when people do that? Anytime anybody does that. What I'm saying is what are y'all saying? We need to build out of every one of these pains, every one of these losses, every one of these traumas. We got to build, and we got to create and create. And so I have to just say that I also have a beautiful culture center that is in a place of the second largest Mexican Central American community, 500,000 people. And the only reason that we're there is because there was no bookstore, there was no art galleries, there was no culture centers, there was nothing for these people. 500,000 people with no bookstore. You can get guns, you can get all the drugs you want here, but you can't get a book, you can't own a book. So we fill the gap. So I would say for all people in the struggle, fill the gaps, get out there, you know they're there, organize to fill those gaps. Now we have a beautiful center that is used by everybody. We have a bookstore so that we educate people's minds, because part of the thing about this issue of nonviolence is we're not educating our kids, our young people. They need to learn. They're hungry. They're telling us, show us the ropes, us older people. I'm going to be 70 years old. I need young people. I can't do this 70 years old. I need young people, and they need us, and we need to be able to be patient and be able to teach them. And plus, not forget that young people have wisdom too. And young people know stuff. And you can't just act like I know stuff and they don't. They know a lot of stuff and we can learn from them. So let me just leave it with that.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this? Because otherwise I'm going to call on Medea, since she and I frequently talk about how to build a movement and where the challenges are. And
well, I'd like to go after Liz because I think the Poor People's Campaign is so critical in this. So why don't you go, Liz, and I'd love to go after you if that's possible.
Thanks, Medea. And indeed, Louis said it right. This conversation is just so beautiful. And there's not a lot to add. I would say that the three answers I have are to both questions, to both bringing people in, like our family and colleagues around us, and to responding to this world on fire, is one, to organize, two, to organize, and three, to organize. Now, I think organizing is all of the things. It's many flowers blooming. It's nonviolent direct action, and it's mutual aid. It's it's doing an analysis so we can expose the lies of those that we're up against. And it's but it means bringing people together and building a kind of compelling power. And I think organizing that in a way that when we have to kind of react to the situations around us. Howard Thurman says, when your backs are against the wall, what you can do is push, right? Well, there are millions of people, tens of millions of people whose backs are against the wall, whether it's because we're being paid too little, whether it's because the police are killing the young men in our communities, whether it's because we have transgender kids with politicians preying on them right now, whether it's, folks not having any bodily autonomy whatsoever, whether it's the fact that we're seeing the biggest attack on our democracy and voting rights since Reconstruction and the Civil War. We're being compelled, our backs are against the wall, and people are pushing. And sometimes that pushing looks like masses in the streets, and the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, believes that a huge part of trying to shift the narrative and to build the kind of power we need to do is to have people in the street, talking about the fight, the plight, the fight, and the insight of those that are most impacted. But again, it's not just being in the street in massive protests. It's all of what it takes to build permanently organized communities who are there at the ready when attacks come, but also are holding forth and living into a vision of what this could be. And so organize, organize, organize. And that's what we're doing, and that's what we're going to keep on doing until we win. And we can and will indeed win.
I want to hold that there. Go ahead, Medea.
Well, I want to give a shout out to the Poor People's Campaign, especially in light of this Martin Luther King connection, because, what you are doing, Liz, and Reverend Barber, and the whole crew of you, taking these issues, the triple evils, and adding to that the issue of climate, because the climate one is not only an existential threat, but there's also a huge, massive organizing movement, not only in this country, but globally around the climate. So that gives us so much more strength in pulling all of these threads together. And while I am a total believer in organizing, when it comes to right now, this issue on Ukraine, I also believe it's educate, 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 because we are facing such a massive, massive propaganda campaign. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, who in this country hasn't heard of Zelensky? When would you hear of a head of a foreign country that they probably can't find on a map? But he has addressed Congress twice, the last time with 18 standing ovations. He has been the Time Magazine Person of the Year. He's been at the Grammy Awards. He's been at the Golden Globes. He's been at the Cannes Film Festival. He's been, addressing every major economic forum there is. I mean, it's unbelievable who is organizing this campaign. And so people just see him, they think democracy, they think help him, they think weapons, they think, we've got to stand with Ukraine. And, speaking of stand with Ukraine, I can't believe you go into an embassy anywhere in the world today, US embassy, you will see an American flag. And what will you see right next to it? A Ukrainian flag. It's like it's part of our country. So this is what we are up against. And we're also up against a Democratic president, and it's also really hard to organize when it's a Democratic president. Were this Trump's war, we would see a lot of our friends out in the streets with us. So we maybe in this last time we have in the chat, people can put in where they think their best sources of information are, so that we can share that with each other as we educate in order to then organize.
Thank you. And this is a perfect moment to transition to the next segment of our program. And we're going to show a video of Reverend Jim Lawson. And then we are going to talk about calls to action, specific things that we can do, what some of the organizations that are part of this program and some of the people that are on this panel are doing. So let's move into that as soon as that video is ready. And there it is.
My fundamental message in the 21st century has been and is the United States must experience a series of nonviolent campaigns that will make what we did in the 20th century look tiny and small and calm in comparison. That is what I insist has to happen. I can't try to pretend what all those campaigns ought to be or can be, but
these are the times for real choices and not false ones.
the King called for a revolution of values. Moved from the orientation for wealth and greed and power and military force and violence to a society that is committed to one another and to making human life in the United States what it can be and by the grace of God ought to be. So we need the vision of the nonviolent movement of America, voiced and symbolized and lived by Martin Luther King Jr. We need our nation to wake up and to wake up to the possibilities that in the 21st century there can be the dawning of a spiritual moral revolution in the United States that will perhaps allow the things we claim to become real.
So I'm going to see if I can invite Zohara back on as we move to the calls to action, some suggestions that for actions that folks can take. And maybe we can get that slide up as well. Beautiful. So just gonna quickly read through some of these, and then we're going to move on to closing, and we'll see if we get Zohara back into the spotlight camera. So first thing, join the Peace in Ukraine Coalition. You can see the link right there, peaceinukraine.org. Sign up at FOR USA, it's Fellowship of Reconciliation, to be part of the work we're building to end violence and hatred, connect with the Poor People's Campaign, and specifically connect with the state coordinating committees, or sign up online. You can just text MORAL, MORAL, to 38542. Demand that Biden use executive action to cancel student debt. Amen. Organize local readings of Breaking the Silence. And there's a toolkit at kingandbreakingsilence.org. Connect with organizations working on transformative justice in your local community. Listen to the Nerve podcast and discuss it with friends. Join faith leaders across New York on February 13th for Religion in a Time of Crisis. Commit to collective actions, nurturing a culture of peace. Create study circles and learn, nourish, and support each other. Engage in intergenerational conversations And remember that another world is possible. And as we said before, educate, educate, educate to organize, organize, organize. And can leave that up maybe for a minute, and then we can move to the closing out of our program, which will be a closing prayer. Zohara, welcome back.
Well,
I'm gonna let you take over, if that's all right.
No. Oh, I was anticipating you introducing Tabitha, Reverend Tabitha.
All right, then I will do that. So,
Thank you.
Pastor Tabitha Holly is very dear to me. So the Fellowship of Reconciliation, we have a fellowship to work with emerging faith and peace and justice leaders. And Tabitha is our 2022-23 fellow, and just an incredible speaker of truth to power, and incredible organizer and a voice for justice and equality and freedom and liberation through nonviolence. And she walks that in her life. So take it away, Tabitha.
It is so good to be here. I'm going to encourage us to put our hands over our hearts for this spirit-centered closing. And I invite us all to take a deep breath together. We have heard and witnessed so much today. And so I leave with you a few words to close us out. We pray and we ask that we be filled with the spirit of peace in the face of war. We seek the courage to reconcile our differences, because it is, in the words of our dear Ash, strategic. We seek the clarity to create sustainable, livable conditions in the face of militarism and economic injustice and materialism and racism. We seek class unity amongst the masses in the face of fascism. In the spirit of gratitude, we celebrate the creativity to repair and reinvest in the improvement of our people and our world. In the spirit of gratitude, friends, we celebrate that victory is on the horizon. We assert and we affirm that as citizens of the world, we deserve to live in safe houses, in safe neighborhoods, with safe spaces to learn, with food security and universal health care. We assert and we affirm that when we walk together, children, we won't grow weary. We assert and we affirm that when we sing together, children, we won't grow weary. We assert and we affirm that when we pray together, we won't grow weary. We assert and we affirm that when we fight together, we won't grow weary. And this is with the spirit of our ancestors who gathered to worship, who gathered to pray, who gathered to chant, who gathered to sing and dance and strategize. In the face of white Christian nationalism and spiritual death, we are filled with the spirit of those ancestors today. And we declare that another world is possible. May it be so. Ashe.
Ashe.
Blessings, beloved.
Blessings.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.